The Alborz Mountains, unfolding like a folding screen along the southern coast of the Caspian Sea in northern Persia, are a continuous range of rugged, rocky peaks that do not easily permit human access, and this barren yet majestic highland, where even clouds struggle to cross, has been a land of isolation severed from the world for centuries. In the late 11th century, the hegemony of the Islamic world lay in the grasp of the Seljuk Empire, a Turkic dynasty that had swept in from Central Asia. And while the vast territories of the Middle East were being integrated under a single Sunni doctrine beneath their iron hooves, a quiet but deadly counterattack was being prepared in the shadowed corners of that massive empire. A minority group known as the Nizaris, a faction of the Ismailis who had been pushed out of the mainstream Shia, devised an unprecedented asymmetric tactic in history to confront the empire possessing powerful military might, not through all-out war, but through psychological domination via absolute terror. The method they chose was not to mobilize an army of tens of thousands, but to strike the heart of the empire through a single, highly trained operative, and the birth of this legendary order of assassins, later known to the Crusaders and Europeans as the Assassins, marked the prelude to opening the darkest and most mysterious chapter of medieval history. At the center of this entire plan stood a figure named Hassan-i Sabbah, who was not merely a fanatic or a contract killer, but a supreme intellectual and theologian of his time, as well as a cold-blooded strategist who pierced through human psychology. After visiting the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt and returning, he wandered throughout Persia to escape the suppression of the Seljuk Empire, gathering followers to follow him and searching for a new base. The place that caught his eye was the Alamut castle, crouching like an eagle on a sheer cliff deep within the Alborz Mountains. Alamut, meaning the eagle's teachings, was a natural fortress accessible only through narrow gorges, and in 1090, Hassan-i Sabbah succeeded in seizing this place through a bloodless entry by employing meticulous stratagems to turn the soldiers inside and bribe the castellan, rather than using force and shedding blood. With this, Alamut was transformed from a simple mountain fortress into the capital of an independent theocratic state, resisting a colossal empire, and a secretive training ground for warriors who did not fear death, becoming a space governed by laws entirely different from the world below the mountains. The system Hassan-i Sabbah established at Alamut was a strict class society and a religious community governed by rigid discipline, and he demanded that the believers who followed him distance themselves from worldly pleasures and devote themselves solely to doctrine and training. The Fedayeen, meaning those who sacrifice, who were the lowest class and the ones who actually carried out assassination missions, were brought to Alamut from childhood and grew up receiving unique mental education along with high-intensity martial arts training. According to legend, it is said that Hassan-i Sabbah instilled certainty about the afterlife in them by using hallucinogenic drugs under the pretext of letting them taste paradise, or by creating artificial gardens in secret parts of the fortress and providing beautiful women and delicacies. Although this story of the Garden of Paradise, which spread widely to the Western world through Marco Polo's travels, has aspects that were exaggerated or distorted by later generations, it remains a historical fact that the Fedayeen possessed an extreme loyalty, fearing no death and regarding martyrdom as glory. The first and most shocking victim of the assassin order was Nizam al-Mulk, the de facto ruler and vizier of the Seljuk Empire, who was one of the most powerful figures in the Islamic world at the time. In 1092, a Fedayeen disguised as a dervish approached Nizam al-Mulk, who was moving while surrounded by numerous guards, and stabbed him in the heart with a dagger hidden in his robes, an event that horrified the entire Middle East. The fact that a vizier who commanded the world lost his life so futilely to the blade of a single assassin deeply engraved the fear in the minds of the powerful that no matter how high the walls they hid behind or if they were surrounded by an army of thousands, they could not escape the blade of the assassins. This assassination was not simple retaliation, but a highly calculated political act intended to paralyze the administrative system of the Seljuk Empire and incite distrust and chaos within the leadership, and through this, Hassan-i Sabbah proved to the world how to shake a great empire with a small force. Following the assassination of Nizam al-Mulk, the activities of the assassins became even bolder and more sophisticated. They targeted and eliminated figures who were threats or hostile to their order, including monarchs, generals, and religious leaders. Their method of assassination was often carried out publicly in broad daylight in crowded markets or mosques, or even in the target's own bedrooms, where they felt safest, rather than sneaking in at night to poison or sniping from a distance. This method of public execution aimed for a purpose beyond eliminating the target, a propaganda effect to plant unforgettable fear in all witnesses present and to have that fear spread through word of mouth. Even more chilling is the fact that the Fedayeen who carried out the assassinations did not attempt to flee but quietly accepted arrest or death on the spot, which was the surest evidence that they were ready to discard their lives like worn-out shoes for their mission. The threat of the assassins was not limited to the Islamic sphere but also became an object of terror for the Christian crusaders, who had advanced to Jerusalem to reclaim the Holy Land, and major leaders of the Crusaders also became targets of Alamut. The assassination of Conrad of Montferrat, the King of Jerusalem, shocked European society, and from this point on, the word assassin in European languages came to be derived from Hashishin, the name of the order, and established itself. Paradoxically, however, the assassins showed a cold-blooded pragmatism that prioritized the interests of the order over religious ideology, such as forming alliances with crusaders when necessary for their political survival, or attempting to assassinate Islamic heroes like Saladin. Even Saladin was forced to sign a peace treaty with Hassan-i Sabbah's successors after seeing an assassin's dagger and a warning note left in his sleeping quarters, demonstrating that the influence of this shadow kingdom ruled by the old man of the mountain reigned across borders and religions. Hassan-i Sabbah remained in seclusion within Alamut Castle for over 30 years without coming out, once devoting himself solely to studying books and commanding the order until he died of illness in 1124. But the system he left behind remained solidly intact even after his death, because he strictly distinguished between public and private matters and emphasized rigorous morality to the extent of executing his own sons for violating rules. His successors were also able to lead the organization based on charisma and absolute authority similar to his. Alamut Castle was not merely a military base but also a center of learning equipped with the best library and observatory of the time, and the fact that numerous scholars gathered here to study astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy suggests that the assassins were not a simple group of murderers. They used knowledge and information as weapons, as well as swords and poison, and by connecting dozens of mountain fortresses scattered across Persia into a network, they created the miracle of maintaining an independent power for over 150 years within the cracks of massive empires. Even after Hassan-i Sabbah passed away in 1124, the system he had built operated solidly without shaking, and their notoriety reached its peak during the era of his successors, particularly Sinan, who came to be known by the moniker Old Man of the Mountain. Leading the assassin order in the Syrian region, Sinan took bold steps, negotiating on equal terms with the kings of the Crusaders, as well as Saladin, and sometimes threatening them. He sought to manipulate all the power players of the world from the palm of his hand, looking down from his fortress at Masyaf. One of the most famous anecdotes involves the visit of Count Henry of Champagne, a leader of the Crusaders, to Masyaf to demonstrate how loyal his subordinates were. Sinan ordered two Fedayeen standing on the castle walls to jump off. As soon as the order was given, the two Fedayeen threw themselves off the cliff hundreds of meters high without a shred of hesitation and died instantly. And it is said that Count Champagne, horrified by this unbelievable sight unfolding before his eyes, had no choice but to sign a peace treaty with Sinan and leave in haste. However, the might of the assassin order, which seemed destined to last forever, was powerless before the true terror approaching from the east, the Mongol cavalry. In the mid-13th century, the Mongol army led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, advanced westward, devastating the Islamic world. After dismantling Islamic empires one by one, the Mongol army targeted Alamut Castle, which had been a thorn in their side. They were a monstrous army whose sole purpose was destruction, against whom the tactics of assassination or intimidation that the assassins had used thus far were completely ineffective. To overcome the rugged mountainous terrain, the Mongols dragged massive siege engines up the mountains to besiege the fortress, and they applied pressure by firing stones day and night to crumble the solid walls of Alamut. Eventually, in 1256, Rukn al-Din Kersha, the leader of the assassin order at the time, realized there was no chance of victory and opened the gates in surrender. And the Alamut fortress, once called impregnable, met the fate of falling to an external enemy for the first time in 166 years. The Mongol army that occupied Alamut received orders to destroy it thoroughly. They demolished the walls, burned the buildings, and, above all, reduced to ashes the library where the vast collection of books the assassin order had gathered over centuries was stored. In this process, numerous books containing precious scholarly achievements in astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy were lost, and most documents recording the history and doctrine of the assassin order vanished, causing great difficulty for later historians in grasping their true nature. The Mongols ruthlessly massacred the surrendered assassin leader and his family, as well as thousands of believers in the fortress, which was an example to those who resisted the Mongols and an expression of brutal will to exterminate them so that such an assassination group could never rise again. Due to this genocide, the assassin order in the Persian region effectively perished, and the few survivors scattered, hiding underground or fleeing to India to barely keep their lineage alive. Although their physical power was annihilated by the Mongol army, the name, assassin and the legends surrounding them survived and were transmitted to Europe, becoming material that stimulated the imagination of Westerners through Marco Polo's travels. In particular, the story that the old man of the mountain intoxicated young men with drugs to let them play in a phantom garden and then made them carry out assassination missions to taste that pleasure again, combined with Orientalist fantasies to become a motif for countless literary works and art. However, modern historians view most of these stories as likely being propaganda fabricated or exaggerated by Sunni Muslims who loathe the assassin order or by Crusader chroniclers. The argument is gaining strength that the etymology of the word Hashishin was likely used as a derogatory slang term to belittle those who were socially marginalized and lowly at the time, rather than meaning those who smoke hashish. Today, the ruins remaining at the site of the Masyaf fortress in Syria or the Alamut fortress in Iran have lost their past glory and turned into rubble, but they still attract the footsteps of many tourists and researchers. The sophisticated water channels and solid fortification techniques discovered within those ruins prove that the assassins were not a simple group of fanatics, but an intellectual group possessing high scientific technology and architectural skills of the time. Furthermore, to modern Ismaili Muslims, the history of the assassin order is remembered not as a simple history of violence, but as a history of desperate resistance where a persecuted minority sect struggled for survival. They continue efforts to re-evaluate Hassan-i Sabbah not as a terrorist, but as a revolutionary who tried to protect the rights of the weak against great powers and as a thinker who was ahead of his time. The story of the assassin order shows us the prototype of the modern concept of terrorism, while simultaneously posing deep questions about the extreme psychology of humans who sacrifice their lives for beliefs. The means of terror, propaganda, and assassination they used remain a classic example of asymmetric warfare where the weak oppose the strong, constantly reappearing in variations throughout the flow of history. However, considering that what they truly wanted was not simple destruction but the construction of their own ideal religious state, their struggle could be viewed as an unfinished revolution that met a tragic end. Because history is the record of victors, the defeated assassins were demonized, but their desperation and conviction hidden beneath the surface, and the cultural legacy they left behind, remain an unknown territory worth exploring. The assassins who hid deep in the mountains and terrified the world, their blades have rusted and their fortresses have crumbled, but the legends they left behind have survived without dying and hover around us. The gaze of Hassan-i Sabbah looking down at the world from the high cliffs of Alamut still hides between the lines of history, staring at us, and as long as human desire and fear exist, the shadow of the assassin will never disappear. The way we remember them might be through fear, curiosity, or perhaps pity. But what is clear is that they dyed one page of medieval history in the most intense crimson. The assassins of legend have now disappeared into the shadows of history, but their name is engraved in the memory of humanity like an indelible brand that will never be erased.